Hello, my name is Dr. Anthony Chafee. I'm an American medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery, but I've also done quite extensive research into diet and nutrition and how that affects health and chronic disease. I've been interviewed by people such as Dr. Sean Baker and others of that genre, and done debates and so forth between carnivore and vegan advocates. One quite recently with ACNAM, which is an Australian nutritional medical board. I just wanted to go over some of the points that I made in that debate. We only had 7 minutes to go over it, so we had to sort of rapid fire some of these things, and unfortunately couldn't do much of a back and forth. But I just wanted to go over some of those points and just flesh those out a bit, and hopefully people find that interesting. So just talking about just the difference between vegan and carnivorism. So first of all, we just have to look at what are humans as a species. So animals, all animals in the wild have species-specific nutrition. They have an evolutionary niche that they all evolved to have, and that's going to be their optimal diet, what they evolved on, okay? So you have to think in that context. Now, what are humans? All the big studies, all the best data shows that we actually are carnivores as a species. That's the kind of animal that we are. Now, can we live on other things? Can we survive on them? Yes. Does that mean that that's optimal? No. We came from an herbivorous background. We have some of those traits left over. We have some people that, had, the agricultural revolution and has some defenses, but again, we're talking optimal. So what is the optimal nutrition for human beings? Why does this matter? Well, it matters because plants and other sorts of food, well, we call it food, but food is species specific. So the food to a giraffe is different than the food to a gorilla. That's different than the food to a zebra. That's different than the food to, a woolly mammoth and a dolphin and so forth. So you need to eat what your species eats, okay? You can ask any zookeeper, they'll tell you that, if you feed an animal something that, doesn't eat in the wild, something that didn't evolve on, it gets very sick. But what does it get sick with? It gets obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, autoimmune disorders, okay? Dogs and cats, known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble. And they get sick. They get the same things. We get the same things. Veterinarians are now calling these human diseases, and they're saying that animals, like pets, household pets, are the amount of human diseases that they're seeing is rapidly increasing. It's gone dramatically up. In the 1970s in America, for instance, the average life expectancy of a golden retriever was 17 years. Now it's 9 years. Okay, that's not from aggressive breeding. It was already a pure breed. Okay, that's from feeding it the wrong thing and it dies young. All right, that's happening to humans as well. What veterinarians are calling human diseases, we actually used to call Western diseases because we only saw these in Western cultures that had agriculture. These were the diseases of the West. Okay, you look this up, in history books. It's all over the place, and that's because we didn't see this in native populations. Right? So in Native Americans and Native Australians and so forth, these people lived as predominantly pure carnivores. They might know which plants to eat when and if they were starving or to use medicinally, but what they ate when they could get it and predominantly ate was a pure meat diet. This is well documented. You can go back hundreds and hundreds of years and see this, okay? They didn't get the diseases of the West, except when they ate the food of the West. When Native Americans and Native Australians eat a Western diet, they are 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all the rest, because they didn't have exposure to agricultural revolution like other people did. And so they don't have as many protections. Now, the people that had the agricultural revolution, 8,000 years ago or so, they have some protections, but they still get these diseases. I remember hearing this fact about the being 4 times more likely to get all these diseases when I was a young child, and I remember thinking to myself, well, doesn't that mean that the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease, and we eat the food and we get the disease just at a lower rate. And what is it that they are eating that we're not? What are we eating that they're not? Well, I didn't know it at the time, but the answer to that is they were eating a pure carnivore diet. They were omitting all these species inappropriate foods. Now, you look at other studies, there's quite a lot of studies. There's a stable isotope study, which looked at the bones of early humans and Neanderthals, and were able to look at certain isotopes and see what they ate. And we're able to compare this to other animals of the day. And they found that humans were not only carnivores, but they were hypercarnivores. We had a higher carnivore rating than lions and hyenas alive at the same time in the same area. So this is a very, very well established fact. There's also a study out of Israel that showed that people were hyper carnivores going back at least 2 million years, 2.5 million years. This is because likely the ice ages. Our ancestors about 8 million years ago were herbivorous. They split off because they started eating meat. They started eating more and more meat, more and more meat. They started having more human adaptations. Our teeth got smaller, our jaws got smaller because we're eating softer and softer food. We're not chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla. And then our brains got bigger because we couldn't take things down with our mouth. We couldn't take things down with our claws because we don't kill things with our mouth and our claws. That's why we don't look like lions. But we did develop our brains. We had to develop our brains because we didn't have the claws, we didn't have the teeth. And so we figured out tactics and tools, and we figured out how to take down a woolly mammoth and take it apart with tools and with our brains. And that's why we live in houses and lions don't. Okay? So why is it that eating outside of your species specific diet can be harmful to you? Well, the reason for that is that plants are living creatures and they want to stay living creatures. If you eat them, they die. All living things have a defense, and plants, because they can't move or fight back like an animal can, who can run away or can fight you, they have to use poison as their main deterrent. I learned in 7th grade biology that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous so that less and less animals could eat them, so that they can survive and thrive and not go extinct. And animals are becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so that they can eat that plant and survive and thrive as well. But other things couldn't necessarily, and so this was their dedicated food source. So that was an evolutionary advantage. Okay, think koalas, pandas, they eat one plant. There's 340,000 plants in the world. Koalas eat one, pandas eat one. Cows, horses, grazing animals, they eat grass. That's it. The other things, they get sick or they die. The leaves that a giraffe eats are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats. Those are different from the leaves that a deer eats. You mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die. So, we know this inherently, okay? If you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, okay? Everyone knows that you'd get very sick, you could die. People have died, okay? So, this is a universal truth throughout the plant kingdom and the fungus kingdom, okay? Is that plants use poisons. If you think about it, all plants are poisonous. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to break down specific poisons in specific plants. But if they haven't evolved to eat that plant is bad for them, and that goes for us too. We've known since the 1980s from the work of Professor Bruce Ames out of UC Berkeley that plants, vegetables, things that we eat all the time, or well, not me, but used to, you guys anyway, they contain quite a lot of poisons. And they were comparing this to pesticides because they were trying to ban the pesticides in the 80s because everyone was getting sick. And they said, well, it must be from the pesticides. And he looked at that and he's like, well, really, the pesticides we've been using for 80 years without any problem, those pesticides? And so he did the studies, and he found that there's actually 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons in the plants and the vegetables, like spinach, than there is in the pesticides we spray on them industrially by weight. Okay, so that's 99.99% of the toxic elements are in the plant itself, not the pesticide. And he also found that it was much more carcinogenic. The naturally occurring poisons were far more carcinogenic than the pesticides we sprayed on them industrially. That's why we still have pesticides, because he showed scientifically that the pesticides are just a drop in the bucket compared to the plant itself. And if you're willing to eat the plant, well, the pesticides aren't really, what you have to worry about, okay? Fast forward to when I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle. we were again, learning things, that plants protect themselves by using chemical deterrents, but we were looking at it in a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens, and we learned day one that Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens. This is 20 years ago. Okay, mushrooms, just white mushrooms, had over 100 known carcinogens. We were given lists: spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, you name it. They all had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens each. And we know that they're abundant, based on the work of Professor Ames. We were very blown away by this. We thought that he must be joking. He must be having us on. And we're looking around wildly, looking for, who's in on the joke and who's smirking. But no one was. And I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he must have read our minds, because he just looked at us and gave us a funny look and said, I don't eat salads. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I said, okay, screw plants. And that was my start on a carnivore journey, even though I didn't realize it at the time. I just knew that plants were trying to kill me. I'm not going to eat plants. So I went to the store and I just bought things that didn't have plants, even though everything has plants. Everything someone else makes is going to have plants and sugar and things like that. So I was just walking around. There was nothing I could buy, and I came across some eggs. I was like, okay, eggs don't have plants in them. Meat doesn't come from plants. Milk doesn't come from plants. So I just ate eggs, meat, and milk for 5 years. I was playing, high-low rugby at the time. I was training, sometimes 8-10 hours a day while in university. I couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. I couldn't get sore. I don't get sore anymore. That soreness is actually from the toxic elements in the plants causing inflammation, pain, and swelling, and making you stiff and sore, which is a deterrent. The plant is saying, do not eat me, I'll make you feel bad. But we eat this stuff all the time, and so we always feel bad. We don't even realize it. We think that's normal. It's not normal, okay? So, since then, I've literally felt like a different breed of human. My body works in very different ways. And I was experiencing this in my rugby and my athletic career. I was playing professionally in England, and I remember slipping off of that without really realizing it. And I remember thinking to myself a few months in, I didn't feel as superhuman as I normally do. Like, what's going on? Am I not training as hard? I was 25. Like, gosh, am I over it now? My body is just breaking down. I figured out later that it was because some plants had mixed in, because some of the meat was breaded, and I wasn't really thinking about it, and I was like, well, it's not, is it that much, does it make that big of a deal? Well, it made it quite a big deal. Okay, so there are other things in plants, so that's sort of a general thing, but let's talk about some specifics. Okay, any botanist on earth can tell you this, and they can tell you a lot more. This is any introductory botany book can show you this as well. Okay, there are quite a lot of things. All right, so quite a lot of plants poison you by making you very sensitive to light. Okay, there's a thing called celery dermatitis, where people who eat a lot of celery or handle celery, pick celery and things like that, they get horrible burns in the sun. They have to wear hats, long sleeve shirt, gloves, because they will absolutely scorch in the sun. Okay, think of how many vegans have a good tan. Okay, limes, they do this as well. They have oil in the skin. This is an unripe fruit. Those seeds aren't ready yet. That tree does not want you to eat that. So if you start grabbing that, picking that, pulling that, it doesn't want that. So it soaks this oil in your skin. You have very bad burns. We have documented, second-degree burns just from sun exposure after handling limes. It actually happened to my younger brother. As a child, we didn't know what it was. We thought it was like an allergic reaction, but no, this is what it was. Then think about cyanide. There's 3,500 different plants that use cyanide that we know of. Almonds are one of them. Okay, there's different amounts of cyanide in almonds, but anywhere from 1 pound to 2 pounds of almonds, so 400 to 800 grams of almonds, is a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult. And yet we give this stuff to children and tell them that it's good for them. So that's pretty wild to me that we do that, and we just play these games with kids. And almonds containing cyanide is not a little known fact. That's a widely known thing, and yet people say, oh well, yeah, there's cyanide in it, but they just assume that there's really not that much. There's quite a lot. I've sat down and just eaten handfuls of almonds while watching television and easily eaten half a pound. That's half a lethal dose of cyanide. That's insane. And so even if it doesn't kill you, like that's not good for your body. Okay. There's nightshades, deadly belladonna, tobacco. These things are quite harmful. They contain solanine, among other things. This can kill you. Okay. We avoid belladonna. This is something that people have used as poisons going back centuries. And people knew for centuries that you don't eat nightshades. And then all of a sudden we forgot this or thought that it didn't really matter that much. But potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, these were all in the nightshade family. And they all contain solanine and other toxic elements. 70 people a year still die from eating potatoes. Potatoes, okay? But it's not that far-fetched. Think about it. I'm sure most people have learned that you take potatoes, you need to keep them in a dark place, in a cupboard or something like that, because if it turns green, it's bad. You can't eat it. Well, what does bad mean? It means it's poisonous, and it's deadly poisonous. If it starts growing a root, you have to cut out the whole root or just throw the whole thing away, because now that's poisonous, deadly poisonous. That can kill you. People that don't realize how bad that is eat it and they die, or because they have to if they're starving, I suppose. But that's a serious thing. And even though a normal potato, when it's not in those forms, isn't necessarily going to kill you, it's not good for you. Okay. And then there's carbohydrates and so forth, which fundamentally disrupt your metabolic system and so forth, which is maybe a topic for another time. But I argue that what people call a fasting state, a so-called fasting state, is actually our primary metabolic state. It's the primary metabolic state of nearly all animals in the wild. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. Okay, so when you're on a carnivore diet, you're in that metabolic state, just like a cow, just like a gorilla, just like a wolf, just like a lion. Okay. So what else about plants? Well, we know that we can't be vegan or herbivores because plants, lack very vital nutrients that you cannot get from anything else. Okay. So if you need to supplement, vegans need to supplement, vegetarians need to supplement. They're generally quite deficient. Look at India. They have high rates of vegetarianism and so forth, but they're generally ovo-lacto vegetarians, so they are getting some animal sourced nutrition, but they're also very nutrient deficient. They have quite bad nutritional deficiencies. They're very they're very deprived in that sense of nutrients. Okay, so if you need to take supplements, obviously this cannot be something that we evolved on, because we didn't have supplements and GNC 50,000 years ago, even 100 years ago, really, for the things that we have available now. We certainly didn't have them 100,000 years ago, 2 million years ago, when people were living as hyper carnivores, as we've seen from all the studies. Okay, so if you need to supplement, then by definition your diet is deficient. Okay, so that can't be our evolved diet. That can't be our optimal diet. There are quite a number of things: B12, D3, K2. You're not going to get enough vitamin A. You have to eat 3 pounds of carrots a day just to get enough. 6 pounds of carrots a day just to get enough vitamin A day. Okay, so that's not going to happen. You're not going to do that. And then there's other things, essential fatty acids such as DHA and so forth. This does not exist in plants. We make some of the essential fatty acids that we need, but we don't make that much. We don't make enough. Okay, and that is what grows your brain. That's what grows your nervous system. And if you don't get these in sufficient amounts, your brain will be underdeveloped, and your brain will start to decay. There's quite a lot of large studies showing that higher saturated fat intakes, higher animal fat, protein, and so forth in the diet protects against Alzheimer's, protects against dementia, protects against Parkinson's, actually protects against heart disease. Okay, we'll get to that later. So on a carnivore diet, you don't need to supplement. Okay, the Inuits didn't do it. I don't do it. The native Australians didn't do it. Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, who just ate horse meat, drank horse blood, they didn't do it. And you don't need to do it, okay? Because it's our evolved diet. If it's our evolved diet, then by definition, it has everything that you need. Now, there's the organization called SIPS, S-I-P-P-S. This is a group of pediatricians in Italy. And they've come out with this. They said flat out, any diet that you need pharmacological supplementation is a bad diet. It's not a good diet. And this is not something that should be pushed on kids. This was in response to people trying to push a vegan diet for children, which is honestly criminal. There have actually been cases of vegan mothers who are breastfeeding and their children dying from the breast milk because it's so deficient in the nutrients and probably have a lot of toxins as well. Okay, so that's quite harmful. Kids that are raised vegan have much higher rates of autism, have much higher rates of short stature, reduced bone mineral density, muscle density, and so forth. This is bad for them. Okay, the autism thing, that there's quite a lot of studies that show correlation with food and so forth, that more meat, higher saturated fat during pregnancy protects against autism. However, there's causative studies as well. Out of, I think, the University of Texas at Austin, they showed that there was a type of autism. And what is autism? Autism is a misdevelopment of your neurons. Okay, so your neurons didn't develop properly, didn't work quite right for whatever reason, and you have a certain form of autism. So one of those forms of autism was found to be caused by a lack of carnitine. Carnitine is thought to be a non-essential amino acid, meaning that we make it, but not everyone makes enough of it. Not everyone makes it at all. And so they found that if you don't have sufficient amounts of carnitine, carnitine is integral for the development of proper development of neurons. And so if you don't have that, you can't develop it properly and you'll get a specific kind of autism. Well, carnitine doesn't exist in plants. It doesn't exist in fungus. It only exists in meat, to some degree in most animal source foods, but there's a ton of it in red meat. Okay, what is the first thing that vegetarians do? They drop red meat because that's the worst, right? Well, no, actually it's the best. Vegans, they don't eat any animal products at all. Okay, so they're not going to get any carnitine at all. So if you have a vegetarian who just cuts out red meat and their kid doesn't make any carnitine at all, well, the chicken and fish and eggs and so forth that they're eating, probably to a small degree, isn't going to be sufficient source of carnitine to develop their brain properly, and they'll get this form of autism. And then vegans who eat no animal source protein at all and get none of these nutrients, get no carnitine, even if they have a slight deficiency, they'll get this form of autism as well. So this is quite serious, and honestly, you could argue that this was child abuse to do this, and that may ruffle some feathers, but I think if you think about this and you understand the science behind it, it's hard to argue that it's not. Obviously, people aren't doing this intentionally. If they were, then that would certainly be child abuse. Parents want to do the best for their kids by and large, and sometimes they'll put them on a vegan diet because they're being told that this is the best thing, but I can tell you for a cold, frozen fact that is the worst thing you can do for your kid. Okay, so this cannot be an R-Evolve diet. All right, it has poison. It doesn't have the proper nutrients. It has low bioavailability of the nutrients that it does have. You don't really absorb the proteins that it does have. You say that's 30 grams of protein from plant source versus 30 grams of protein from animal source. You will absorb nearly all of those 30 grams from an animal source. You'll absorb very little of the 30 grams of plant protein. We've seen this in tons of studies. Patients with stomas where they have to have a bag where their feces come out. They say have to some sort of surgery, some sort of issue. They have to rest their bowel or maybe remove their bowel. We can see this. We can see that when you eat animal protein, you absorb nearly all of it. It's not coming out in the bag. Whereas plant protein like soy and so forth, that almost all of it comes out. And so this gets down to your colon, the bacteria, you start getting work on it, and you get nasty byproducts. Okay. So what are some other things? You think about sugar. Sugar is in everything. This is something that we enjoy, but it's something that's thought to be evolved because we recognize this is safe, because there's nothing really that contains fructose, which is the sweet part of sugar, that is acutely poisonous for us, that will kill us that day. So we recognize this as a quick hit of energy that we can survive on and then get our normal meal. Okay, but long term, this causes very serious problems. It's also addictive. It It gives a dopamine signal to the addiction parts of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And it kills the same areas of your brain as meth to the same extent as meth. Okay, we see this on MRI studies. Okay, then in 2009, Dr. Robert Lustig from UCSF published, I thought, quite brilliant work, and published dozens of things since then, written books and so forth. I'm sure you guys can look him up. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. They showed that fructose acts in your body, is broken down by your liver to the same byproducts as alcohol. Okay, and you get the same disease profile from those breakdown products as you do alcohol, okay, because it's the same thing. So you have fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, okay, it's even indicated in cancer, it feeds cancer and so forth. Lustig's trying to show, or trying to see if he can show if there's a causative nature of fructose with cancer. And and then it's associated with Alzheimer's and so forth. Okay, so if this is associated with Alzheimer's, this is able to influence the brain and potentially cause Alzheimer's, serious degeneration, fatal degeneration of an adult, mature, healthy brain. What's that doing to a children's brain? What's that doing to a developing brain or a fetus? It's not gonna be good. Okay, so you have to think about this. Kids like sugar. Oh, they like sugar. Yeah, of course they do. It's a drug. You give them cocaine, they'll like that too. I'm sure people have seen on YouTube that little 2-year-old kid, I think probably in Indonesia, where he smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and he just really likes it. So he seems healthy, so we'll just let him keep smoking. It's like, yeah, he's healthy now. That's not going to last too long. Okay, so what Dr. Lustig also showed was that it's sugar that is actually the disease process involved in heart disease, not cholesterol. Okay, it actually it metabolizes into SDLDL, VLDL, and these things are then glycated and are a part of an inflammatory process that then precipitates atherosclerosis. Okay, it's not from the cholesterol you get from animal fat. Okay, so cholesterol was actually never the problem, and that's something that's come up more recently. In 2015. The Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, reported and published actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 50s and 60s and so forth, talking about how there was studies showing that, or suggesting that, sugar caused heart disease, which now we know it does. Okay, and at the time they said, okay, we need to cover this up. And so in their own words, they detailed how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol was causing heart disease when it was really sugar. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA in 1965, and then magically the USDA declares unequivocally that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, stop eating both. And it changed the world. Okay, think about it. After this declaration, late 70s, early 80s, they the food habits of Americans changed dramatically, and the rest of the world sort of started dropping like dominoes after it, and they all started seeing the obesity and health and chronic disease epidemic that Americans first saw in the 80s. Okay, well, as Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. So the theory was that cholesterol from animal fat, causes heart disease. Okay, so in America, we reduced our cholesterol intake by 30%, reduced red meat by 33%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, and also sugar and carbohydrates and so forth. What were the results? This was hundreds of millions of people. What were the results? The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates tripled, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodegenerative delays such as autism, all these things increased exponentially, and they all increased at the exact same time. Okay, these things almost didn't exist before then. Now they're the only things we treat, right? So heart disease tripled when we reduced cholesterol. Okay, you can't say that cholesterol causes heart disease when you reduce cholesterol and heart disease increases dramatically. If anything, you can say it's protective, and that's actually what we're seeing now in the studies. There's quite a lot of big studies that came out in 2015 and beyond that back this up. with hundreds of thousands of people, found that people on statins were either equivalent or having worse outcomes. Okay, why is that? This is something that's supposed to be saving so many lives. No, it's not. There's a study with 60,000 people over the age of 65 on statins, and people that were on statins with lower cholesterol were having worse outcomes. All right, statins have side effects. And you have to take that into account when you take any medication. You have to contend with the side effects. So this is doing something that now we know you don't need to do, and it has side effects. So this is something you really need to think about. This isn't medical advice. It's just general knowledge. Okay, this is something that you should really take seriously and think about, and re-examine the studies. There are other studies with hundreds of thousands of people finding that people with higher LDL cholesterol, so-called bad cholesterol, are having less heart attacks, less strokes. They're cardioprotective, they're neuroprotective. Okay, people keep pushing this, and there was there's a cardiologist that was on the other side of the debate who's arguing for the vegan side, and we didn't really get a chance to sort of go back and forth. But I just wanted to ask him, if you think that cholesterol is the end-all be-all for heart disease, tell me why 50% of people who have heart attacks have low or normal LDL cholesterol. Answer that one. Okay? So if you look at that, there's not even really association. And now we actually know that all those correlative studies that proved that cholesterol caused heart disease were actually fraudulent. Okay? And you look at the Framingham study, this is a cardinal study in cardiology showing a strong association with total cholesterol and heart disease. The problem with that is that they misrepresented their own findings. They concluded something that was not supported by their own data, and this has come out, okay? But not everybody knows about it, and that's a problem, okay? So, you'll hear different people say, well, I went vegan and everything got better. Okay, maybe. Not everyone does, though. It depends on where you're coming from and where you're going to, all right? I ask people because they think vegan, I just dropped meat. And that's the only change I made. I started calling myself a vegan, then good things happen. And so I asked them, okay, so you kept eating cookies and cakes, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol. And they say, oh, no. I stopped going out to eat. I don't eat any sugar. I don't use, sugary sauces. I don't drink alcohol. I make whole food, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they're making a lot of changes. And one of those major changes is they're getting rid of added sugar and alcohol and so forth. But they're blaming the meat. Okay, so this is like saying, I went vegan and stopped doing coke and smoking cigarettes, and gosh, as soon as I stopped eating meat, I felt so much better. It's like, well, there's a couple other things going on there, Chief. So, and that's what you have to think about. Okay. Because also, the omission of one harmful substance isn't enough. There are myriad harmful substances in the world, as we know, because every single plant has thousands of them. Okay, and they all have different ones predominantly. So, you get rid of one bad thing. Let's say meat is bad for you. Okay, but what about all the other bad things for you? Okay, so that's not a really good argument. Okay, because just because something doesn't have arsenic doesn't mean it also doesn't have cyanide. Okay, which plants do. Okay, and then you have to think, okay, well, just because it doesn't have meat doesn't mean it's good for you. Oreo cookies are vegan. Cigarettes are vegan. Alcohol is vegan. Cocaine is vegan. Heroin is vegan. Okay, just because calling something doesn't really tell you much. It just means no meat. So that's not really doing much for you. Okay, you have to think past that. All right. So let's go to just a general thing. One of the other things that vegans have a problem with is saying that animals are bad for the environment, but they couldn't be more wrong. Animals are vital for the environment. Animals are part of the environment. They're part of the ecosystem. Okay, this is a system of plants and animals living together, and they all have a part to play. Okay, animals recycle nutrients. They eat the dead leaves, the dead wood, the dead grasses, and then recycle those nutrients. Okay, they eat down these dead plants and so forth, and then they make room for the new plants to grow up, because otherwise they're getting blocked out by the sun. This happens all over Africa. And to combat this, they try to burn off all these fields of dead grass because there aren't enough animals to eat them down. And if they don't burn them down so that the new grasses can grow up and the new plants can grow up, they'll turn to desert because the next plants will just die and they'll die and they'll die and they'll just turn into a barren land. So they're burning 1 billion hectares of grasslands a year in Africa, just in Africa. And 1 hectare, burning 1 hectare, creates more pollution and worse pollution than 6,000 cars do in a year. So this is a wild, wild problem. Solution is animals. We are losing about 27 billion tons of topsoil per year. Okay? That's an area the size of Kentucky every year. This is because of farming. When you grow a farm, when you grow crops, you necessarily have to destroy an entire ecosystem. You kill all the plants, you kill all the animals, you grow one crop, and then you kill the animals that are trying to eat them. Those plants draw out nutrients out of the ground, and that can eventually become barren. This is why we have to use large-scale fertilizers and so forth just to grow anything. Well, and when you till this stuff up, the winds can hit it, the rains can wash it away, and you wash away topsoil, you blow away topsoil. This is what happened in the Dust Bowl in America in the 1930s. The middle of America, one of the most verdant areas in the world, this all of a sudden was turning into a desert. They couldn't grow anything. It was, dust storms, all these sorts of things. Locust swarms. It sounded like a Bible story, and people thought it was. They thought this was for people's wickedness and so forth. And then they figured out, no, this is actually from farming. We're tilling these massive, massive long tracts, and things blowing up. They're losing the topsoil and so forth. Things couldn't grow because there was no topsoil. Topsoil takes an insane amount of time to grow. It takes about 500 years to grow half an inch of topsoil, 1 centimeter. Okay, and so we almost did that to the middle of America. We almost turned it into a Sahara desert, and then we figured that out. And we revamped our entire farming structure, and we were able to hold that off. But we're still losing an area the size of Kentucky a year. Okay, you can only do that for so long. That is a very finite resource. Now, I say the Sahara Desert for a reason. The Sahara Desert is man-made. That didn't used to be a desert. We have satellite infrared images showing that there were human civilizations all across what is now the Sahara Desert. Egypt used to be jungles, not deserts. We have soil samples that were tested in the 1990s that found that actually when the pyramids were built, when the Sphinx was built, they were built in jungles. Okay? Then they had wide-scale agriculture. They didn't really know what was going on. And this all turned to deserts, okay? In Egypt, you have the Nile River, flooded every year, and the silt would replenish the nutrients from the soil. I learned that when I was a kid. Well, what does that mean? That means that it has to replenish the nutrients every single year. They're saying this was why they were so prosperous and they could grow so much. Well, you have other places that don't have a Nile River. They don't have that. And they stop all these nutrients out of the soil, and they stop growing. They turn barren. They turn to desert. People like Alan Savory, who's down in Zimbabwe, he's actually found that if you take massive herds of animals, bunch them moving like a herd would in the wild, they can actually revitalize deserts. He's reversing deserts. He's been doing this for 40 years or so, going through massive deserts and turning them green and verdant. He's done TED Talks. He's done different sorts of things. He's written books and textbooks and so forth. Very interesting guy. All right. There's another guy, Dr. Peter Ballestedt, who I've spoken to. Very interesting guy. He's a PhD in forage agronomy. You should look up his stuff. He talks about the science behind this, the science behind animal agriculture and husbandry, and how that affects the environment and how vital and necessary it is for the health of the world. Okay. So, people always ask me, what do you eat? Get me on a meal plan, these sorts of things. This is the easiest way of eating that exists. You know exactly what you can eat. You know exactly what you can't eat. There's no rules as far as, you have to limit calories and limit this and do this, have this many macros and so forth. You don't need that. This is natural. Nature will take care of it. You eat what you're hungry for. You eat what tastes good, and it will stop tasting good when your body has enough nutrients. That's just a natural response. Things taste better when you're more hungry, when your body wants those nutrients more. So, if a steak doesn't taste good, you're not hungry. If it does taste good, you are. So you eat what you want to eat. You eat when you want to eat. You don't have to eat in the morning or night. You don't have to intermittent fast or anything. You only need to do intermittent fasting if you're eating carbohydrates, because you're trying to run out the clock on the insulin, get back into that primary metabolic state I mentioned earlier. So really what you eat is just meat, salt, water, okay? Any meat that you enjoy from any animal, it doesn't matter, fish, chicken, beef, lamb, it doesn't matter. You just want to get enough fat. Okay, fat's very important. Animals in the wild get about 70–80% of their calories from fat. Native Americans, they would cut off the back haunches and leave them, and they would take the rest of them because there wasn't much fat. Okay, they'd make pemmican. There's 50-50 fat and meat, right? So the fat's very good for you. Think of the Inuits and so forth, people living up north. They eat blubber, okay? They're not fat, okay? And that's another thing. You don't see fat animals in the wild. I remember thinking that as a kid, why are animals just so, so muscly and tough, and we're just, we're not, we're just the only squishy animal on earth. It was explained to me that, they exercise all the time because they're in the wild, so they're constantly moving, constantly exercising. But that doesn't explain animals in the zoo. You have a lion or a zebra, living in an enclosure the size of this room. That's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle. They're not going anywhere, okay? Have you ever seen a fat giraffe? Fat zebra, fat lion? No, they're not fat. They're ripped. They look like they're on steroids, right? That's because they're eating what their species evolved to eat. They're eating what they're supposed to eat. And if you eat what your species evolved to eat, you will look like that as well. I've been doing this for years and years and years. People ask me all the time, during COVID and so forth, how do you work out? How do you work out all the time? You're so in very good shape and so forth. And I'm like, I haven't been to the gym in 3 months. I've done push-ups twice. I've gone running once. And they just don't believe me, but that is it. This is what the human animal looks like when you feed it species appropriate nutrition. And obviously when you work out, it does even more than that. I've played professional sports. I have a long background in exercise and so forth. And so, when I work out a lot harder. I know how to work out. I know how to push myself. And, I get more out of my workouts when on this way of eating, and I retain it longer. It doesn't just go away. I can maintain under 10% body fat just with eating as much as I want to and care to every day. My body just naturally, it does that, and yours will as well. It will get down to the body fat that your body wants you to be at genetically, okay? So eat the fat. My hard rule as far as what to eat is no plants, no sugar, nothing artificial, okay? That goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well, okay? So think about that when you're looking at an ingredients list. Generally, if something has an ingredients list, you shouldn't eat it because it's going to have a bunch of plants and sugar and crap like that you don't want. The other question is alcohol. Do I drink alcohol? Very rarely, less than once a year, okay? And if I were to drink, I would generally drink, hard stuff like just straight vodka or something like that, because I don't want all the mixers, I don't want all the sugar, I don't want all the crap that's like in beer and wine and so forth. Whether or not I enjoy it, that's not really the point. Because I've found that, with my workouts and things like that, it takes about 3 weeks to get, out from drinking one time, from going out one time, not even getting wrecked or having a horrible hangover. But I noticed that for 3 weeks, I can't work out as hard. I don't feel as good. I don't have the energy that I have. I don't have the sleep that I had for 3 full weeks. Okay. So it takes that long to get out of your system. And, frankly, I would rather feel like a superhero 24/7 than feel drunk sometimes. Okay. That's just, my choice. So that's it. I hope that wasn't too much for you guys. I hope that just covered a lot of bases and that you guys found it helpful. If there's anything else, I'm probably going to go into some of these things in much more detail and expand on them as well. And if there's any specific questions that you guys have and want me to address in a video, just let me know and I'll try to do that. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.